Nova gameplay de Crimson Desert foi divulgada pela IGN, um vídeo pessoal trazendo trechos inéditos de gameplay do jogo e também algumas explicações por parte aí dos desenvolvedores, comentando um pouquinho mais sobre o combate, sobre o jogo no geral. Então vamos aqui juntos assistir e ver as novidades do Crimson Desert, jogo esse que eu tô bem animado e bem curioso pra jogar, então tô fazendo a cobertura dele aqui no canal com vocês. Vamos lá então, ver aí mais um pouquinho do Crimson Desert, né, no IGN First, esse quadro. Ó o dragãozão, que da hora, velho.
It would be easy to take a quick look at Crimson Desert and assume it's another fantasy action game where you hack and slash your way through enemies with repeated presses of the attack.
Tem um robôzão ali, pô.
And if you equip your protagonist, Cliff, with a sword, you can certainly do that. But tap two of your controller's face buttons together and he'll lunge, thrusting the blade directly forward. If you then press both the light and heavy attack buttons at the
Esses
same
são
time,
trechos que a gente viu da
he'll
última gameplay que eles
magic
divulgaram,
infused
né?
overhead slam, bringing his sword down in an arc of dizzying particle effects. There's more than one way to swing a sword, basically, and that applies to everything in your combat arsenal. Transition from aiming a bow into a dodge roll, and you'll trigger a brief window of medieval Matrix slow motion, perfect for scoring a headshot. Cast a spell at the apex of a jump, and you'll launch yourself into the air, riding the energy
Essas
of the
mecânicas a
metal
gente tinha
slats.
visto também no último vídeo, né? Ele soltar essas magias pra subir aí.
In conjunction with shifting the direction of the left analog stick to unleash a variety of increasingly amusing wrestling moves, from simple grapples to human hammer throws. For this month's IGN First, we spoke to the design team at Crimson Desert developer Pearl Abyss to learn how they crafted this deep, multi-layered combat system. The very first thing they said was both surprising and helped contextualize everything. One of the key inspirations for Crimson Desert's combat was retro arcade games like Samurai Showdown, Final Fight, and King of Fighters. Suddenly, all those multiple combos and link moves make much more sense. But those fighting game combos are not necessarily the thing that Pearl Abyss intended to replicate. The team cites the strong sense of impact that comes with each blow, both inflicted and received, as a key aspect they wanted to capture. That's clear not just in the visuals, but in the crunchy audio.
Os combos parecem ser partes importantes do jogo. Eu acho isso super importante também, porque varia, né? Pra você jogar e você faz combo diferente e tal.
Plus plenty more skirmishes in the open world, it's clear that there's more to it than that. Fighting game characters have access to many different moves that can be chained together to create unique approaches and strategies. Open world games, on the other hand, typically have a much more restrained moveset. A dodge, an attack, and a counter, for instance. But despite being a fantasy open world game itself, Crimson Desert's long list of combat moves seems to be gunning for the breadth of options that fighting games thrive on. Cliff's ever-expanding ability tree means there's a multitude of ways to approach any fight. It's not just ranged versus melee, but the more minute choices within those options. Will you weave kicks and suplexes into your sword fight, channel lightning down your blade, use whistling arrows to summon artillery strikes? The important takeaway here is that Pearl Abyss refuses to provide any real strict definition for Crimson Desert's combat system. Unlike something like Batman Arkham, there's no rhythm or pattern to follow. The combat team told me that they had no interest in creating a game where you have to respond to on-screen prompts by pressing specific buttons. The kind of system
então não vai ter aqueles sinais, né, de quando você vai tomar um ataque e tal. Igual é o Batman, o Shadow of Mordor.
Aims to fulfill a player's fantasies by allowing them to do whatever they want in any situation. That arguably makes Crimson Desert's approach to battle a bit loose, and for some, the distinct lack of rules or rhythm may be frustrating. There are no hard counters for particular enemies, for instance, nor any kind of strict rock-paper-scissors relationships between different attack or defense types.
Não tem parry, será?
A particular weapon may be stronger against shielded enemies, for instance, but there's no requirement for you to use it. The same applies to bosses. While they certainly have attack patterns that can be memorized and weaknesses that can be exploited, Pearl Abyss has no interest in demanding you pay attention to that. The team believes that any method of attack should be valid. Well, within reason. You can't swing a 500-pound monster by its ankles, of course.
É curioso, mas não tem um parryzinho, nada?
But no worries if you don't approach extends out into the world itself. The Black Space engine that powers Crimson Desert is able to simulate elemental reactions. So water can either freeze or conduct electricity when struck by the correct spell, while wood
Eu acho isso muito foda, a interação dos elementos, né?
The combat team cites the modern Legend of Zelda games as inspiration for this, in which there's constant interaction between you and the environment. But this is very much a system that you can master and exploit if you choose to, rather than a core component of combat.
O jogo é muito inspirado em Zelda, tem muita coisa, né? Isso é nítido.
To hold your foe in place, or coax them into a metal grid you can then electrify with a lightning lightning spell. Cliff is not a wizard, and so his spells come courtesy of a bracelet that grants him simple mastery over fire, ice, and lightning. But new weapons and gear help expand his ability set further than the unlocks available on your skill tree. There's a spear, for instance, which opens up like a propeller and blasts enemies with bursts of wind like a deadly Airzuka, and a sword that summons an angry genie-like creature.
É a arma do boss que ele matou naquele último vídeo, na última gameplay.
Cliff is able to ride a number of mounts, which in the early hours
Eu imagino cada boss que você matar, você vai ter uma recompensa. Algo daquele chefe, né?
And you'll be able to saddle up on a massive grizzly, which can swipe at foes with sharp
Ah, que da hora, véi.
effectively thinning out herds of barbarians. Fast forward a few hours and things become stranger still. Your simple horse could be traded for a raptor. Yes, you can ride
Que
on the back
isso?
of a literal
Mano,
dinosaur.
dinossauro,
If you prefer your
velho.
scaly mounts to fly and breathe fire, then Crimson Desert also has that covered too.
Que
Fantasy's most
isso?
important creature is present and correct here, and in the game's later hours you'll be able to command Tristar the Dragon, who will swoop in and
Caraca,
take
que
your
foda,
captive.
velho.
But that's not the wildest option. Dispelling any notion that this is a typical high fantasy video game, in Crimson Desert,
Porra,
you
isso é
can
muito
pilot
foda,
a
na
mech.
moral.
Yes, really.
Olha um mechazão, mano.
The Dwarven engineered battle
Parece que saiu de
robot is a
BioShock
late
esse
game
mecha
treat
aí.
that asks the question, what if a BioShock Big Daddy and a Titanfall mech had a baby?
Eu falei, olha lá.
Active thrusters, machine guns, multi-target
Pô, a Higiene tá dando uns spoilerzão, véi.
P-blast, your
Qual
sword
foi?
and board wielding enemies don't stand a chance.
Caraca,
Fire-breathing dragons
mano,
and
que
machine
loucura.
gun-toting mechs could absolutely destroy Crimson Desert's balance, but they've been carefully plotted on the campaign's overall power curve. Pearl Abyss's combat team explained that such mounts are not designed to be simple
Pô, esse dragão
tools that
muito
you can
foda.
use whenever you want, and so all of the robot's destructive devices drain a limited fuel gauge, which, when depleted, will put the machine out of action. This means you can't just use this modern marvel of technology in perpetuity. You won't be able to stroll up to a boss battle and decimate a knight with your stock of missiles. But when you are
Cara,
on the
que
pilot's
loucura,
chair,
mano. Um
there's no
mechazão,
denying that things
jogo
become
meio
more of a massacre than
medieval.
an
Que
even
loucura.
matchup.
Os personagens não conseguem fazer
Pearl Abyss is
nada.
happy with this power spike though. The team considers it something of a present or a reward for players who have progressed so far into the game. As you can see, there is a wide range of combat options to say the least. And that brings us back to the fighting game comparison. Something like Street Fighter is arguably the inverse of Dark Souls. As in a From Software game, the true challenge is learning everything about your enemy and then attempting to exploit that. Whereas in a fighting game, the challenge is to learn everything about your character and master their moveset. Pearl Abyss subscribes to the Street Fighter approach and explains that the goal is for Crimson Desert's difficulty to become
Tô curioso pra ver
increasingly
essa ligação
manageable the
com
more
os jogos de
massive
luta, né?
flexibilities. That's easier said than done though. Like a fighting game, there's the sense that every one of Cliff's actions has an alternate version if you combine it with the right skill. This naturally creates depth, but also complexity. Dive in without any instruction, and it can feel quite overwhelming. In an attempt to keep things as simple as possible, Pearl Abyss has put a lot of focus on what each button does. The idea is that there's consistency in every action. If you want to introduce an element into an action, you build on your existing knowledge of the controller. Clicking the thumbsticks, for instance, fires magic spells from your palms. Click the left stick to use your left palm, click the right stick to use your right palm. And so to do a triple jump, which is powered by your magic spells, you string together an L3
É, parece que o sistema do jogo vai ser complexo, né? Muita coisa.
At first glance, Crimson Desert certainly looks like many other open world games, and that's not an unfair comparison. As we'll explore later in this month's IGN First, there are plenty of genre staples here, from puzzle dungeons to faction quests to bounties posted on the town bulletin boards. In totality, this is not an unusual game, but zoom in on the combat and you'll find quite an unusual beast. It's built atop the classic staples. There's still dodges and parries and regular attacks.
Cara, tô bem animado pra esse combate do jogo então, pô.
Where I can chain Spider-Man's swing into Batman's glide, into a ground pound that's delivered like Sonic the Hedgehog doing his best Hulk impression. In short, it's safe to say that Crimson Desert is trying something different.
Que é o que a gente sempre quer da indústria, algo diferente, pô. Caras, ó, vou falar pra vocês, rapaziada. Eu gostei dessas novas informações aqui, tá? Pô, achei bem legal, achei ali a viagem com o dragão muito foda, o mecha. Eu sei que tem uma galera que fala, pô, esse jogo é uma mistura de tudo. Tudo bem, mas parece que tá trazendo algo de diferente, pelo menos, né? A IGN elogiou bastante o combate, falou que ele é diferente, falou que, por mais que o jogo tenha muitas coisas semelhantes, né, com outros jogos, ainda assim a parte de combate parece ser bem diferente, né? O que me anima. Tô bem curioso, caras. Tá bem interessante esse jogo aqui, na moral mesmo. Pô, achei muito foda a parte do dragão voando, de você ter o dragão ali. Porra, muito da hora mesmo. Olha que legal, velho. E tá bonita essa parte do jogo, né? Só que eu falei pra vocês, né? O contraste do verde aqui bem acentuado. Mas, pô, legal aqui as informações novas e essa gameplay inédita que eles trouxeram. Mas e vocês? Estão curtindo Crimson Desert? Comenta aí embaixo no campo dos comentários. Pessoal, tamo junto. Muito obrigado pela companhia. Um forte abraço. A gente se vê no próximo vídeo. Valeu, falou e cia!